Her skin was a cascade of shifting violet and gold, a storm of bioluminescence reacting to the heat of his palm hovering just millimeters above her arm. Around them, the Aegis Nexus translation feed screamed digital warnings of a broken treaty, red emergency lights washing over the cold metallic diplomatic table. But Kalen wasn't looking at the screens. He was looking at Lyra's eyes, twin pools of liquid silver that widened as he took the 60-page Terran protocol manual, heavy with formal lies, and shoved it off the edge of the desk. When perfect protocol fails, raw human emotion saves the galaxy. And to think this beautiful, terrifying freefall started because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. Truth is, Kalen had been shaking. Just 3 hours earlier, he was pacing the corridor outside the Grand Emissary chamber, his heart hammering a bruising rhythm against his ribs. The stiff collar of his ceremonial uniform dug into his throat, the air in the staging room tasting faintly of recycled oxygen and copper. The Luminari were a species of intellect and light, rumored to view human emotion as a primitive defect. Humanity, meanwhile, was terrified of sparking a war over a violently misunderstood trade route, bridging the galactic divide. One honest mistake at a time wasn't the official strategy, but they were rapidly running out of options. The heavy chamber doors had parted with a soft pneumatic hiss, the sound swallowing his last ragged breath. Kalen locked his knees. He ran his thumb over his datapad, preparing to recite the high Terran greeting he had drilled until his voice cracked. "Respected children of the starlight, we bring water and peace." But then she crossed the threshold. Lyra didn't walk so much as flow into the room. Her form was a breathtaking current of color, shifting with an alien grace that made the air around her hum with static warmth. Kalen had read the briefings. He knew that the Minari communicated their internal state through chromatics, but no sterile report could have prepared him for the sudden flush of deep, mesmerizing sapphire that rippled across her skin the second she looked at him. His brain simply stopped. The hours of linguistic drills dissolved. The silence in the room pulled tight, a physical weight pressing against his chest as the rest of the Terran delegation waited for their lead envoy to speak the words that would prevent a war. "You are absolutely gorgeous." The words fell from his lips before he could bite them back. Bare, quiet, and completely unauthorized. A collective gasp went up from the Terran side of the table. Behind him, a junior attaché actually choked on his own breath. Kalen's stomach plummeted. He had just initiated first contact with an apex civilization by tossing out a blunt human compliment. A diplomatic disaster turns into an interstellar romance. Only he didn't know the romance part yet. He just stood there, waiting for the defensive lasers to warm up. Lyra froze. The translation collar around her slender neck blinked a rapid, confused green, grinding through the human syntax. And then, something extraordinary happened. The calm sapphire on her skin shattered into a brilliant, chaotic flush of sunrise pink. Her chest rose and fell in a sharp, sudden rhythm that looked remarkably like a human catching their breath. She tilted her head, her silver eyes locking onto his with a piercing, unguarded curiosity. A soft, musical trill resonated from her, translating a second later through the overhead speakers. "The Terran envoy finds my thermal output aesthetically pleasing." Kalen swallowed the lump of panic in his throat. He looked at the horrified faces of his superiors, then back to the warm pink hue radiating from Lyra. He let out a breathless, exhausted laugh, abandoning the script entirely. "I find everything about you pleasing. I'm Kalen, and I am incredibly sorry for ruining this introduction." It turned out, the Luminari had spent centuries dealing with species so paralyzed by the fear of conflict that they hid behind stiff formalities and calculated diplomacy. They had never encountered a creature honest enough to just lay themselves bare, acknowledging their own foolishness without hesitation. One mistranslated compliment changes the fate of 2 star systems. Her pink glow deepened, spreading to her fingertips, and for the first time in her life, the Luminari emissary stepped away from her guards, closing the distance between them. She stopped inches from his chest. The ambient temperature in the room spiked, a dry heat radiating from her skin that smelled faintly of crushed minerals and static. Kalen held his breath. He didn't dare move. Truth is, he was terrified the spell would break if he shifted his weight. "Your words," Lyra said. Her voice was a layered chord, flattened by her translation collar into a synthetic monotone. "They do not align with the Terran Declaration of Territorial Sovereignty. Our analysts concluded your previous communications were a declaration of a hostile blockade, and there it was, the misunderstanding that had nearly doomed them all." It turned out the previous diplomatic mission hadn't just fumbled the trade route negotiations. They had fed the Luminari a mathematically perfect, legally unassailable proposal, but it lacked context. The alien algorithms had interpreted the rigid boundaries as an act of aggression. But Terran High Command, meanwhile, had been too proud to admit they didn't fully understand the Luminari's fluid navigational charts. "Because the Declaration is a terrified guess," Kalen said. His voice was low, meant only for her, ignoring the frantic, hissed warnings of his superiors behind him. "We don't want your space, Lyra. We're just afraid of the unknown, and we hide that fear behind massive dreadnoughts and complicated rules." Her silver eyes searched his face, dissecting the micro-expressions pulling at the corners of his mouth. The pink flush beneath her translucent skin swirled, cooling into a deep, steady amethyst. Slowly she reached out. A long, elegant finger hovered just over the back of his hand where it rested on the table. He turned his palm upward. An invitation. When her skin finally met his, a jolt shot up Kalen's arm. It wasn't a shock, but a sudden, overwhelming rush of pure sensory data. Heat, gravity, the rapid rhythm of a pulse that beat twice as fast as his own. Lyra gasped, her chest hitching as she absorbed the heavy, grounding weight of human anxiety mixed with his desperate, thrumming desire for peace. The translation collars on both of them shorted out under the bioelectric surge, sparking once before going dead. The room erupted. Terran guards reached for their holsters. Luminari delegates flared crimson with alarm, but Kalen and Lyra didn't flinch. They remained anchored to each other, fingers tightly intertwined over the cold metal of the diplomatic table. In fact, they didn't need the machines anymore. Honest, direct communication often resolves conflicts faster than rigid adherence to formal protocol. The Luminari didn't need flawless syntax. They needed to feel the raw intent behind the syllables. By dropping his armor, by exposing his own foolish, awestruck humanity right out of the gate, Kalen had offered the one thing the Terran Empire had always withheld: his truth. Embracing cultural differences and emotional vulnerability wasn't just a strategy. It was the only way they were ever going to survive each other. Lyra turned her head toward her panicked delegation. She didn't speak a word. She simply let the brilliant, unbroken amethyst of her skin bathe the sterile room in a calm, authoritative glow. The Luminari weapons powered down. The crisis didn't end with a sweeping political mandate. It ended with a shared, quiet exhale. Months later, the Aegis Nexus ceased to be a simple military outpost. It transformed into the beating heart of the Resonance Project. Kalen's accountable mistakes had acted as a powerful catalyst, proving that mistranslations could be bridges instead of walls. Their unexpected romance launched a revolutionary Universal Translation Network 1 that mapped physiological and emotional intent alongside bare vocabulary. But for Kalen, the real victory lived far away from the council chambers. It lived in the quiet moments on the observation deck, watching the stars blur into streaks of light, with Lyra's head resting against his shoulder. Her skin would flush a soft sunrise pink every time his fingers traced the line of her wrist, and he never needed a machine to tell him exactly what that meant.